Well, good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending upon where you are in this world, and welcome to today's DevOps.com webinar. I'm Charlene O'Hanlon, moderator for today's event, and I welcome you. We have a great webinar on tap today, as always, but before we get started, we do have a few housekeeping items we need to go over. First of all, today's event is being recorded, so if you miss any or all of the event, you will be able to access it on demand via an email link that we'll be sending out. Also, today's question, we are taking questions from the audience today. So if you have a question for either of our panelists anytime during the webinar, please don't hesitate. Use your GoToWebinar control panel and submit your question. We'll take probably about 10 or 15 minutes near the end of the presentation and go over the audience questions. And then also just a reminder that if we do not get to your question during the Q&A session, our esteemed panel of experts here will be receiving a copy of all of the questions. So I'm sure they'll be more than happy to follow up with you after the webinar. Okay, with that, we'll go ahead and get started with today's webinar, which is how testers can become agents of change in their organizations, and they should. Our speakers today are Elise Carmichael, who is the VP of Product Strategy, and Adam Satterfield, Director of Testing and Quality at QA Symphony. Hi guys, thanks for joining me today.
Hi, thank you.
Hey there. All right. So Elise, I know you are gonna get things started, so I'm gonna put myself on mute and let you get to it.
Great, thank you. So welcome everyone to our webinar. We're super excited to talk to you about this topic. It's the first time this has been presented, so it's all new exciting material just for you. So this webinar is about how testers can become agents of change to help make things better at their organizations. But really, this is not specific to testers, but you do have two testing experts, if you will. So a lot of our comments and questions are really focused on the testing industry. So we'll start off with a couple quick introductions here. So we have Adam Satterfield on the line. He's an extraordinary test expert. He's a wide range of testing leadership experience and knowledge in the industry. And like all great leaders, he started out as a testing practitioner himself. So he's currently the Director of Testing and Quality, and he's based in Atlanta, Georgia, the same location that QA Symphony is also based. So we like to have Adam come do talks for us at our conferences and things like that because he is so great at it. So if you have not heard him talk yet, you are in for a treat, and no pressure, Adam. And then you have you have me. My name is Elise Carmichael. Like she said, I'm the VP of Product Strategy at QA Symphony. So I started out as a software engineer, then I turned kind of a technical lead, and then I turned engineering director, and now I'm a product lead. So I just love to build things. I love it even more when I have a great team that can build stuff even better as a group, like we have at QA Symphony. And given that I'm talking to you guys today, I'm going to give QA Symphony a very quick plug. So QA Symphony makes a product called Qtest. So you may or may not have heard of it, but it's a platform of products. At its core, it handles test case management, but it also gives you a lot of enterprise features and helps you with integrations into all of your other tools. So you have sort of one source of truth for all of your testing metrics. So we integrate nicely with Jira or Selenium or Appium or Cucumber, and I could go on for probably 10 minutes on the things that we integrate with. But the other thing we pride ourselves on is we have a very open platform. So if we don't integrate with it, you can add integrations. We kind of model off of tools like Jira and Slack. And one last thing is please ask questions. We love your questions. And even in addition to questions, if you have any comments or stories or anecdotes that you want to share, go ahead and put them in the question box. And if it makes sense on the slide, maybe I'll interrupt Adam and share it. We want this to be a little bit conversational. So really quick, the agenda for today up here, we see, what is an agent of change? When you hear that, what does that mean? How can you drive change? Even if you're not, someone's boss, how can you drive change in your organization? The pitch, let's talk about how to create a pitch to drive that change. And then let's work through some of the problems that you will undoubtedly encounter. So Adam, I will pass it over to you.
All right, great. Thanks, everyone. Hey, I hope you're having a wonderful day so far. I am Adam Satterfield, as Elise said. So I'd like to start out all of our talks with a quote. So you may or may not have heard of this fine gentleman here, Albert Einstein. I really like this quote. It really helps to frame up our talk today, because change really happens from within. It's that internal spark that you can use to drive positive change to your organization. So when you think about, as we're going through this, really it's a change in the way that we approach our problems. It's a change in the way that we approach our pain points, and it is really changing our thinking. So again, this is a really good way to frame up some of the discussions that we're going to have. So getting a bit into an agent of change. So what is an agent of change? An agent is someone who drives positive change throughout an organization. It is the innovator. It is the critical thinker, the one who really makes a difference, no matter what their title is. The key takeaway here is that you don't have to be a leader to drive change. If you are a doer, if you are someone who is hands the keyboard every day, you can naturally be someone who is an agent of change, because you're the one who has to deal with that pain day in and day out. And it also, as you go through and you want to drive change as a doer, it can help you grow into that role of a leader. There's this snowball effect that the more change and the more positive energy that you can put behind the work that you're doing, the more you will become recognized for that work. If you're a leader on this call, we would ask that you be open-minded to change. Don't say no right away. No is a very easy answer. Yes or maybe is a much more difficult answer. Give your team the opportunity to prove themselves. Challenge yourself to be open to ideas. Are you setting up the proper ways for your team to introduce new ideas? Are you giving them opportunities to innovate? And then the last one here is a bit tricky sometimes. This is the outsider, someone who is potentially a consultant or a contractor, or someone who wants to enact change in a department that they're not part of. You don't always have to stay in your lane and suffer the consequences of bad processes coming from another department. You can still use the principles that we're going to talk about today to help drive that change.
So Adam, you said something about being a leader and don't just say no right away. I did want to add something really quickly. So I was in a situation recently where we had a new employee come in, and this person has all kinds of really great ideas, and it's so easy to say to that new employee, no, this is how we do it, and to almost be annoyed by them. But I would encourage you, if you are a leader, like Adam said, be open-minded. Even if they're a new employee, they come from a different perspective, and it's really useful to hear and follow through on. Give them a chance.
Yeah, that's a great one, Elise. And that reminds me of a story of someone that I used to work with on my team at a previous company, where he had a really good idea of bringing in this new, at the time, and very nifty tool called Slack, which I'm sure that quite a few folks are familiar with this, but it was brand new to the company. No one else in the company had really experienced this. And he brought that experience with him and showed the value of how it can improve communication all across the company. And by having a leader, my leader at the time, who was very open to that, it allowed us to drive this excellent change to the company that really pioneered and changed the way that the various organizations communicated with one another. So yeah, actually, that's a very good point there, Elise. So this kind of goes to something that Elise was here saying, a second ago, is, you have to be the one to take the reins and drive the change. An agent is someone who, wants to see an increased quality in the product, potentially by installing a new, testing technique, or potentially a tool that makes the cross-team communication easier, as we were mentioning before with Slack. But it really is up to you to drive these quality improvements in your organization. Opportunity doesn't wait for anyone. It can certainly pass you by in a heartbeat. So don't rely on other people to drive the change that you want to see in your organization. And when we think about change, there are three main categories of change that we like to talk about: tools, process, and people. Oftentimes, it helps us to organize and categorize the types of change that we want to enact. Sometimes you can have more than one of these, you can have two, and sometimes it can be all of them. But if you understand how to categorize, it can help you in your end goal and understanding how to frame what you're really asking for here. And Elise, I think you've got some experience around this area as well, correct?
I think, who doesn't? There's always the people, process, and tools problem, and I have always found the people change is by far the hardest. It's easy to show a process is, more efficient. It's easy to show a tool is more efficient, but to get people to change their mindset, I think that's the absolute hardest thing you can do. And sometimes it doesn't work out for everyone, and that's okay too if it's not what they want to do. For example, at my previous company, when I started there, we had a lot of manual testers and a handful of automation engineers. And we had this plan to train all the testers and any new employee coming in to be automation engineers. And some of the manual testers did not want to learn anything new. So that's, to me, the kind of a people problem where it's really important to be open-minded.
Sure. Excellent. Yeah, and chances are that many of you on this call, you have a great idea, but there may be some confusion around understanding how to drive that idea through your organization. And that's what we're really hoping to do today is give you the skills and techniques to help drive some of those changes through your organization. Oftentimes, great ideas can start with complaints, things that make your job difficult. What are you doing on a day-to-day basis that is difficult? It can be done better. It's a huge pain point for you. Chances are there is a tool or a process that is holding you back. There's something that someone somewhere implemented that maybe not had a true understanding of the impacts, and it's causing pain for you. So one of the things that we like to say is really work to break the complaint cycle. It's really easy to sit down and grumble and really complain about the actual problem, and it's much more difficult to enact change. So one of the things we like to do is we talk about the start, stop, and continue cycle. This is taken from Agile retrospective. So you may have done this for those of you who are on Agile teams, where you sit down and you think about what are the things that we did that we should stop, the things that we should start doing, and the things that we should continue doing. And it really provides a nice framework to identify some of the opportunities. It's a chance to think back on the work previously done and to figure out how we can do things better. How can we grow, not only as a person or as a team, but also as an organization.
So this is one of my favorite things to talk about to help empower people. So I've done these start, stop, continue things in a couple of different ways, Agile retrospectives, even employee reviews. And I've actually really liked it because it's very straightforward. You're always going to get good, bad, and potential, I guess. But one of the things that has always really bothered me, and I'll kind of give you a little anecdote here, is people complain but don't do anything to resolve it. And I think this is probably general human annoying behavior. But I worked with this person who I swear constantly complained about everything. This is all they did, is they complained about what technology stack we were using, what the process was like, who they had to work with, who they had, just constant complaining. And they went so far as they made a Slack channel just to complain about things and brought other people with them. And so now you have this whole group complaining about things, and it was really kind of disastrous. It really made people upset during the day, and people would be crabby. So what I really wanted this person to do was stop complaining and do something. So everyone is really empowered in some way to say, okay, I don't like this tool set. This is why I don't like this tool set. Here's what could make it better. Let me try something, see if it works, and prove it out. And then you can kind of go from there, which Adam will talk about in a minute. But man, if you can just get people to stop complaining and start doing something, be one of those doers, I think that would go a long way.
Yeah, excellent. And that really frames up the next point that we have here is, once you are able to break that complaint cycle, you start seeing the true change. I like Elise, we can talk about this one here in just a second, but she framed this really well to me is, I made this. When my team makes something, I made it and it makes me feel good. Ownership, it feels great to own something. Again, this is from a leadership standpoint is if you are working with your team and you allow this to happen from the ground up, the adoption is going to be much easier. The innovation, people are going to want to own it and see it done through the very end. And a lot of teams, or a lot of ideas come from the team. They don't necessarily come from the leaders. It is the team, it is the doers who are actually in the product day in and day out who have the most experience and can potentially see the biggest benefit from some of these innovations. It really, the way we like to phrase this is empowerment from the top down. If you are a leader, make sure that your team feels empowered, that they can make these suggestions and that they can break out of the complaint cycle, that they feel safe and that they understand what their boundaries are. And then from a doer standpoint, own the problem, own the actual driving of the change and the innovation. And Elise, I think, I'll kick it over to you because I know that you're real passionate about the I made this topic.
Yeah, I don't know if you guys on the webinar have seen this meme, but I think it's, I don't know, kind of funny. And I think they're making fun of it, but I actually think it's real, where they have someone who says, I made this, and they're holding a little thing. I don't know what it is, like a box. And they hand it over to someone else and say, I made this. And the other person kind of takes it away later and they said, I made this. So they kind of stole their idea. So I think it's meant to be bad, but I think it's in an organization where you have a team of people. I think no matter who writes the line of code, you are a team, you're working on it and delivering it together. So every single person on that team should feel responsible. And once you start feeling responsible for everything that anyone does, now you're starting to get ownership, especially when you can say, hey, I don't think we should do this thing that way. Here's why. And if you don't feel ownership in what you're doing and what you're building, you're going to really not like your job. And I was going to ask, we don't have a poll question set up, but I would love to see some people in the question area just say, I feel ownership and this is why. So if you have any anecdotes, I'd love to see it.
Great. So let's get into some of the practices that we can use to help drive change. For us, and the experience that we've seen is it all starts with the WIFM. WIFM is a great concept to understand. WIFM is short for what's in it for me. Why is WIFM important? When you tend to phrase your thinking around and your points around the what's in it for me, it allows you to think about what the other person can be concerned about and why the change is good for them. Oftentimes, driving change to the organization means understanding your audience. Who are the decision makers? Who is going to say, yes, here you are allowed to make this change, or here is the funding for this change? And WIFM can really help you understand how to frame your conversations to where it impacts and the audience will understand what you're saying. Next is, if you kick off an idea, you really need to be prepared to go all the way with it. Again, this goes back to some of the ownership standpoint is, this may take some time to really dig in and have your idea and turn it into an actionable item, and that's perfectly fine. The one thing I'll say here is that once you have that idea, don't let it die on the vine. Actually drive that and see it to the end. And then before you proceed with explaining this problem and your solution to the audience and the decision makers is ensure, do you understand the root of the problem? You may really like a tool or you have a great innovation, but what is the core problem you're trying to solve? Is it wasted effort where the team is having to spend too much time logging defects because the process is broken? Is it wasted money? Are we spending money on a tool that we really don't need? Or are we spending money on a lengthy process? Potentially there's a way we can do things better with virtualization, as an example there. Is there low quality in a process where we're having quality problems? Understand the problem there, and something that goes along with this as well is, what is your company's business model? Understand really the reason why your business is doing what they are doing. What is the most important to them? Is it getting the most amount of money from their current customers? Is it growing the customer base? Ensure that you understand the business priorities and you match those to your changes. Let's get into the pitch. This is one of my favorite things to talk about. And for those that aren't familiar with what the pitch is, this is really taken from where agencies have to pitch ideas to companies so that they will pay them money to execute on those ideas. And really what we're doing here, it's not much different. We oftentimes, in order to enact change, it requires funding. If it doesn't, you're in a much better spot. But 9 times out of 10 from what we've seen is it does require some funding. And the pitch is really your chance to understands how to explain what you're trying to do to your audience. And we'll go through some of the steps here in just a minute. One of the examples I'd like to show here as well is at a previous place I worked at, we were really struggling to get the right test data at the right times. We had an idea, the team got together, had an idea to create mocks for the earlier automation scripts, the smoke test and things like that. This is a pretty big change in process, however, and it was quite a bit of a shock to some of the developers and the leadership. So what we did is we got all of our ideas together and we pitched it to them in a lunch and learn. And based on doing it that way, we were able to get their buy-in, and they really understood the problem. We were able to execute on that. But without the pitch, we would not have been able to explain the problem, what we're trying to do, and why it's important. Elise, do you have any experiences around giving pitches?
I do, but I have one that is a little bit off the wall. It may be not the traditional one. So I have a friend who works at a large financial institution in Atlanta, and he was telling me about his 10-year-old daughter one time and how she desperately wanted to buy some video editing software. I think it was Camtasia. It's like $300 for a 10-year-old, which seems kind of insane. And so when she asked for it, her dad said, well, go make me a presentation and let me know why you should have this. And so she went and made a PowerPoint deck as a 10-year-old and said, one, this is what's in it for me. I'm going to learn all these great skills and it's going to be great. And this is what I'm going to accomplish with it. And this is what I'm going to build. And then the other part, the what's in it for me bit that she did in terms of her father, she showed like the return of investment for him, like how this is going to make her financially independent because she's going to learn these skills. It was kind of crazy to see, this father and daughter thing, but it's the same principle as anywhere else. Is you need to show that value that the other person is really looking for and cares about.
That's a great story. I'm going to have to remember that next time my daughter asks for some money for a project. I like that one. Okay, so in the concept of a pitch, one of the things that you need to do is you need to build your summary. Once you have all your thoughts down and some of your collections, it's time to build a summary detailing the change. One of the ways that we typically like to talk to folks about this is if you're having a hard time collecting your thoughts, there's something called mind maps. If you're not familiar with mind maps, I highly recommend going out and doing some research. There's a lot of good videos on YouTube, a lot of very good tools that are free or nearly free that you can use, some that are just plugins directly into your Chrome browser. But you can use mind maps to collect all your thoughts and to frame them and organize them. Once you have all of those summaries, once you have all those thoughts down, it's time to build a summary detailing your change that you want. One of the key things here, though, is include the pain points. If you think about before when we were talking about how to drive change to the organization, understanding the problem oftentimes is the same thing as understanding what are the pain points. What are the points that are causing us to hang up? Where are we really struggling? And what is this change going to do to help us with the struggle? One of the things that I've seen here is in a previous organization, I really wanted to drive some massive quality improvements throughout the organization. This included implementing behavior-driven development, adding and enhancing some automation, and I kept getting shut down. And one of the things I had to do is actually go through and take a look at what is the cost of a production defect for our organization and how many do we have. And once I was able to build that and include that into my summary and my thoughts, it allowed me to better explain the change that I wanted to make, and the change was able to go through. So again, as you build your summary, you can use mind maps to help organize your thoughts, to get them into a cohesive form, but include your pain points. The last thing I'll mention here is that a lot of times when people think about summary, they think about it in a presentation format, but you want to make sure that you know your audience. Is your audience going to be, someone who is a leader that only reads, 3 bullets and can only read in the PowerPoint language? If that's the case, you need to have PowerPoint. If it's not, maybe you can have more of an informal presentation where you can explain the problem. So again, know your audience here on the summary piece. One of the key things when building a summary is to plan for disagreement. I do quite a few speaking engagements, working with a lot of teams, and the greatest piece of advice I ever received was from a fellow that was a good mentor in the quality world, James Bach. And he said, write all of your thoughts and your presentations as if someone is going to disagree with you. It allows you to reframe the way that you're thinking. And so instead of just saying, I have this amazing idea and it is the most perfect idea in the world, it allows me to say, I have this amazing idea. Now, what are all the things that someone can disagree with me? What are the weaknesses in my plan? And if you allow yourself to open your mind and think about it that way, you'll be better prepared and plan for potential snags and pitfalls. Elise, what is your experience around this right here?
I think I couldn't stress this enough. We, as I run the product management team at QA Symphony, and we are constantly poking holes in absolutely every new thing that we do. So, for example, we're building out some artificial intelligence features, and because this is such a controversial type of topic, we wanted to run it by a bunch of customers, and every single one of them poked, a dozen holes into it. And you have to look at that as a positive. So okay, well, this may not go over well because 80% of people said this. So let's make sure not to go the wrong way with this and to focus on the right thing. And it could be your idea really isn't going to work sometimes. So maybe we have to pivot a little bit or really change the initial plan. But we're still trying to get the same point across and same benefit to our customers, and you're still going to try and improve whatever it is, and maybe it's a 180 or something, but you're still going to benefit in the long run from it.
Excellent. So now that we have our summary, we have our pain points and our talking points, and we have a plan for disagreements, it's time to get all of this together in a cohesive thought. This is truly the key moment in your journey. It's where you bring everything you have learned and you turn it into a story. Oftentimes, there is a great way to explain what you're doing. Everyone loves a story. If you can frame your point in terms of, we have this problem, I have this idea, here is the day in the life of a tester or a developer who is struggling with this problem, and here's the potential solution we can have that is going to allow us to alleviate the problem or increase productivity. It can help frame for your audience the true journey of what it would mean to make this change. And you present that. You're going to be strong because you've planned, you understand what some of the disagreements are. And now it's just time to get in front of your stakeholders and make your pitch. One of the things that really I want to stress here is that change can be successful. A lot of times we hear about, where someone had a really good idea and they were immediately shot down. If you look inside your organization, you're going to find teams or individuals that have successfully made change. It's how most organizations grow. So one of the last tricks as you're pulling your pitch or you're having that conversation is, talk to those in your organization who have pushed success through and have been very successful. Talk to them about what are the hurdles they had to overcome. Is there a certain way that they had to frame their message? Who were the individuals that were potentially roadblocks and how do they overcome those? Use other people's success to help set you up for success. An example that I have here is that I had at a previous place I worked, I wanted to enhance the automation team. I wanted to grow the automation team. And again, I was getting pushback. So what I did is I went out and I measured the amount of time it was taking to run a certain number of tests in a manual standpoint. I looked and measured the amount of customer service tickets, the amount of defects, and I put a cost to all this. And then I was able to very clearly and articulately explain if we added an automation team, we would be able to cut down on a certain percentage of this manual testing, which would free up our manual testers to test the more complex scenarios that our end users seem to be running. And when I framed it that way and I told that story, I was able to push this change through successfully. Elise, do you have any examples here as well?
Yeah, I have kind of a broader example. So my last company was called Mobiquity, and we had this, it was a professional services company, and they specialized really in mobile app development and website development. And we wanted to create this onshore development center so we could be really close to our customers, but we wanted it to be not in San Francisco or some very high cost city. And so the city that was chosen is called Gainesville, Florida. It happens to be where I live and how I know about this company. But they chose this, it's a small city in Florida, and there are very few professional software developers or testers in this area compared to, like, say, New York. So we have this issue of, okay, well, who are we going to hire to do all this great work? So the director of development there, Daniel Cohen, he decided, you know what, we're going to not just move people here, we're going to train them here. So he created this whole boot camp style training program. It was for iOS developers, Android developers, web developers, and also test engineers. And like I said, I referred to this in a previous story. We wanted all of our test engineers to be technical. So he made a case to hire people either straight out of college, changing degrees in physics, or maybe they just showed some aptitude for testing in the interviews. We decided to train them for a couple months. And this is a full-time employee. They have no real experience. We don't really know. So we're basing this off a lot of interviewing. And then even once they go through the training, we can't build them on a project for a little while. So you have this tons of downtime. So making a case that they're going to become very successful and really bring back the cost it was to train them in the first place was a really hard case to make. Not only that, you have to move people to Florida if they're not already there. Maybe some are there. We ended up moving a lot of people. And this was wildly successful. So the fact he made a whole business case to start it. So even, if you're thinking, gosh, I really wish we were doing, the Python, maybe we want to be cool and hip. Maybe we all want to switch to Tricentis, Tosca, or whatever it is, but you're worried, how do I get people to adopt it? Training is really hard. Changing people is really hard. Maybe it's talking about a training program and, putting a cost on that. So even things that you're trying to do that seem really insurmountable are still possible. You just have to make the right business case.
Excellent. So we've talked a bit about success, but there are times when you will become derailed in your drive to enact change. In fact, I can pretty much guarantee that if you're at a large organization, the first answer you are probably going to get is going to be no. It happens to everyone. You get a great idea, you get a couple of yeses, and then you get no. No, as I mentioned before, is a very easy answer for leaders to say. It's easy to turn around and say, nope, I don't want to pay for it. We don't have the funds for it. Or no, we're not going to enact that change. So you should be prepared to get no. Much like as we went through our summary and we were poking holes in it to prepare for disagreements, prepare for a no. It allows us to reframe. It gives us the opportunity to rethink what are we doing and make sure that we looked at all aspects. We'll talk about here in just a minute about some things you can do once you get that no or once you get derailed. But first, I wanted to go over some of the more common reasons why projects and huge changes can be derailed. My favorite here is death by committee. I've seen it as really some of the biggest reasons for downfall, especially if you're in a larger organization. Everyone wants to give their input. They want their 2 cents. And this is really one of the things that we do to get around this death by committee is you have the concept of an MVP or MLP, as one of my previous leaders used to call it, the most lovable product, can come into play is, can you pare your request down to an MVP to show value right away? Most likely the answer is going to be yes. Is there a way you can roll this out to a smaller audience at a smaller cost? Can you get a demo or a beta or a pilot up and going to allow you to really show the value of it in a microcosm standpoint? That's the best way to get around death by committee. Another way to do it as well is to be very strict with your time limits. is if you get a pilot going or if you have some sort of demo or a beta there, ensure that the team or the committee understands the dates and the times when their feedback is supposed to be end by. And then after that, the window is closed to provide feedback. So you really have to work around this, because this is something that I see rear its ugly head many, many times in large organizations. And you really have to drive through that with that MVP, or ensuring that you're setting the correct time limits and communicating those time limits. The next one is, I know this is Elise's favorite here, and I'm sure she's got a story for us in just a minute, is the I'm the leader and I know best. Sometimes leaders can be the biggest blockers of change. I really like this quote. It's supposedly attributed to P.T. Barnum, but it's comfortability is the enemy of progress. And when you think about it that way, it's absolutely true. You get some folks who are doing their work and they're just comfortable with the way the process is. Even if the process is broken and it causes pain, changing and doing a new process breaks them from that comfortability, and that can cause someone to be afraid of the unknown, and afraid of what might happen if we enact this change. So we're going to talk a little bit here in just a minute about how to get around this comfortability, and how to get around this I'm the leader and I know best. And then lastly here is a misunderstanding of the need. Did you clearly articulate the need for what you were doing? Why is this change important? Make sure to go back. If you're feeling that the reason why your change is being blocked, go back and think about, did I address the need? Did I address the pain points properly? And look at it from those multiple perspectives. Elise, did you have a story to add here?
Yeah, the one that catches me is the I'm the leader and I know best. It almost makes me laugh, because I know you can all picture this person, maybe not at your organization, but I have someone in mind where they were doing and hopefully they never ever see this webinar, because they'll probably know it's them right away. But there was a QA leader at a previous company I was at, and he did the I'm the leader, I know best to everyone constantly. He rejected anything that was new and different. He just flat out knows if it was something modern, anything technical related, manual testing, and Excel sheets was like all he knew. And one thing that he asked for every week was a status report from every single team. Say there's 30 teams, and the status report had things like, planned points of what we were supposed to be at this point completed on the project, number of test cases written, and a lot of stuff that is not super useful to anyone. And even then, the numbers are kind of fuzzy numbers, and they're not very meaningful on its own. But this is the data that he expected. And so he pulled together every single test lead on every project, had them spend probably 2 hours once a week creating this report and sending it to him. He would aggregate it, color code it in like a red, green, or yellow kind of situation, and send it out to the entire executive team. And at first, everyone was freaked out because everything was always red. But everything was always going to be red based on the data he was trying to collect. And we're like, well, gosh, couldn't we use the tools to get this data so we didn't have to have people manually do it? Or why is this the data that we're collecting? Did not want to hear it. And eventually it frustrated everyone else at the organization. So it kind of stopped for a variety of reasons. But sometimes you just kind of get stuck in these situations where you have someone and you cannot understand it from their point of view or their perspective.
Yeah, absolutely. And we'll talk a little bit in here in just a second about how you can potentially get around that. At this point in your journey, one of the biggest things you can do is to give up. One of the biggest, mistakes you can do is to give up, is to take no as your final answer. If you truly believe in the change that you want to make, and you truly believe that it is going to make a positive impact, don't give up. Really rise from the ashes here. This is your chance to pivot, to reframe your conversations, to not give up after no. So really the 4 things that you can do once you get this no, once you get this derailment, is the first one is to reframe the value. Ensure that you are clearly articulating what the value of this change is going to be. Check your WIFM. Maybe you came across some different audience members that you weren't necessarily predicting or weren't necessarily anticipating. So, understand that audience, check your WIFM against that audience. You may have several WIFMs, and that's okay. You just need to figure out a way to collect those and ensure that you're framing your value here. Elise gave these really two ideas here that I absolutely love. This is a very simple way to think about it, is if they control the budget, focus on ensuring that your money pieces of your pitch are very tightly documented and very tightly explained. If they control people, for instance, if they're a people leader and the change you're making will affect them, focus on the people. What is the benefit? What is the actual change? Ensure that you are clearly articulating the process changes that you're going to have here. And then this next one here, I'm going to kick over to you, Elise. I know that you've got some good thoughts around what a skip level is and why this might be a good time to enact that.
Yeah, the story I just mentioned about that manager that just always is a no manager, that's a good example of using a skip level discussion, because it's frustrating for everyone on the team and nobody is making progress. So once you can kind of, I don't want to say gather a coalition, but like get other people to make sure, to give you a sanity check, make sure that you are not crazy and this is not an inappropriate kind of conversation to have. I think that's a good time for a skip level discussion where you talk to your boss's boss, or maybe it's someone that's not your boss's boss, but someone in the area. So maybe you want to talk to the director of engineering, and maybe the QA director doesn't report up to them, or maybe you have kind of a different structure, but someone who would care about what you're talking about. And something about the people I think is interesting. You might have a tool, I'll just throw out an example, like one of the HP tools, and maybe people just hate using this tool and people leave the company because they are full-time using this tool. You might have a case to say, use another tool like the awesome Q-Test Manager, this slight plug. But maybe they want to like switch tools to make their lives just more enjoyable. That's a kind of wishy-washy, but it's a case you can make for attrition. So you can make it less wishy-washy if you wanted to. So that's, or advancing technologies. That's another good people one. Sometimes people feel stagnant in their career paths. So giving more opportunities by, spreading out the types of tools and technologies that you might learn are some really great people-focused ones.
Yeah, absolutely. And one of the things around the skip level discussion is ensure that you understand what your boundaries are with your leadership. If you don't have those conversations with your leaders right now, it may be good to have, before you start pushing a large change through, is go ahead and have that conversation. Is your leader comfortable with you talking to their boss? Is that something that is acceptable for the organization that you work at? So go ahead and kind of understand that. And if it is, build a rapport, introduce yourself to that person before the first time they hear from you is when you're trying to make these massive changes. As much as you can have that rapport built with your leadership structure, it's really going to help you in the end when you actually need to make some changes. So when we get down to it, there's just really a couple of things that will help you get over that last hump. And it's really, we like to talk about breaking the complaint cycle. We've talked about that a couple before. It's just get up and actually do the work. There's, something to be said about ruminating on a problem, and it will essentially eat you alive if you don't ever do anything about it. And innovation is the way for you to break out of that rumination cycle, is to innovate, to actually drive that change. And then lastly here is, and Elise mentioned this just a second ago as well, as, find someone who agrees with you for this change. This doesn't have to be a solo journey. Some of the things that I've seen folks do is, if you're very passionate about something on the quality space, is look for other people who can essentially be your quality champions throughout the organization, someone who can represent your ideas, someone who has the same passion. You can potentially start, book clubs. You can start lunch and learns. Really start to build that groundswell. If it's something that you feel this change is going to be very important, but it may be difficult to push through, the more folks that you have on your side as you're pushing this through, the easier it's going to be at the end. And, oftentimes, as we know, having a partnership will certainly help get your ideas across. So with that, I think we are going to kick it over to some Q&A.
Awesome. All right, so we have a couple of questions and some comments come in. So one that I wanted to bring up from Renata, who works in the banking industry, had mentioned, and I pushed this question publicly, that they have a process called Red Team, the idea, poke holes, devil's advocate. And I asked her privately, well, what does that look like? And she said that they would get requirements from different IT members for changes in process areas or systems. And once they gather the information, including the business value, which is extremely important, how much money will it, or how much will it save or improve or support different areas? They build the design and then get approval on that design. And then they sit down with, a business analyst, review it together, find holes, make it better, review it. And then once that's done, it goes to another manager, and they all sit down together and review it together. And so once that whole group agrees, then it moves on. So there's a lot of people involved with a new feature, which I think is great. There's a lot of people to poke holes, which the more the merrier. So let's see. So that was more of a comment.
Yeah, absolutely. And one thing on the comment as well is, I think that highlights for a lot of these larger enterprises, banking, healthcare, organizations like that, government, definitely, is sometimes change takes a while. It takes a while for folks to really understand the problem. So patience is going to be your best ally if you work in large organizations like that.
Yeah. And we got another comment from Joshua that he says, in mid to large size organization, one person as a single agent of change may not be enough. Targeting the pitch to the right initial audience is crucial, and identifying who the major influences at the organization are, and focusing on them, aiming at them as early adopters of change. So that can certainly help lead the effort, and I think it's fantastic for carrying weight. Exactly.
Yep, excellent point.
So I have a couple of questions here. So here's one. I tried taking some initiatives in implementing test automation at my company, but my boss ended up really upset with me because I spent time on it and I didn't necessarily ask about doing it. So what approach should I take? Because this is something that I'm passionate about.
Sure. So, this one is an interesting one because, we do see this a lot in a lot of organizations. So, try to think back on not just that test automation is awesome and we love it and we think that it's something we should do, but what problem are we trying to solve with the test automation? Are we trying to deliver faster? Are we trying to increase our coverage? And really try to frame the problem. So instead of your boss just saying, that you're trying to enact a change on your own, help him or help her understand what that problem is. And I will say, it is unfortunate that you were in that spot, because I would hope that leaders would really take on that innovation and see that innovation. But again, no is a very easy answer for many leaders, and oftentimes it's around that comfortability. Where they like how things are going. So, work to frame the problem, understand, if you've got a few folks that are doing testing, if you have a production defect problem, understand what your production defects are, and then really kind of frame it from that standpoint. And then what are the benefits that your automation or your automation suite or tool will bring to help alleviate the problem?
Great answer. So here is a timeless question that I have. I really want to start using BDD. And if we have a lot of testers on the call, you'll really understand the difficulties here. But we can't get enough buy-in. So I think you have some experience with BDD at your organization, but how do you recommend showing the importance of something like BDD to the test leads or engineering leads?
Yep, absolutely. So this one right here is definitely one that I'm passionate about, and I've got a good story here. Is one of the things that we were trying to do is, for a place that I worked at, we wanted to implement behavior-driven development. The team was a little bit resistant. So what we allowed them to do, or what we got agreement for, is, hey, let's take a small team, one of these Scrum teams, and we're going to train them on behavior-driven development. And if you remember about BDD, the magic here in behavior-driven development is around the conversation. It's driving the conversation to understand the requirements, the user stories, the what ifs. And one of the things that we found is, as we trained them, I asked them to bring, real user stories or real test cases to the actual training. And we found with the team using the BDD principles, they expanded their coverage by about 70%, where the developers had a misunderstanding of what was actually supposed to be developed based on what the product owners originally asked for, just by using the concepts around BDD. So essentially what this shows is, if you're passionate about BDD, it may be on you to develop a little mini training session and try to grab a few folks to run them through that training session and show them the value of what it means to have a conversation and to think about testing and to change your testing mindset to be very much upfront in that sprint planning or backlog refinement area. The next thing I'll note about BDD here as well is you've got to get business buy-in. If you don't have the business, and when I say the business, it's potentially a business analyst or product owners, product management, whoever is actually thinking about the really cool business ideas that they want the development team to develop, you need their buy-in because they need to participate in the BDD session. So if you do the two things of get the business buy-in and really try to run it again in a little microcosm and then take the initiative for yourself to create that training, it will allow you to get much further in your organization by implementing BDD.
I absolutely love what you said about using the actual project that you were working on and getting everyone on board to at least try it out in a workshop. I think that was a genius idea. Yours or not, but still genius.
Thank you. Yeah, I know workshops are great. And that's really, an answer for a lot of this stuff is, being able to actually show, whether you call them a workshop, a pilot, whatever it might be, but being able to actually show hard evidence of a positive change that a tool, a process, or a person can make, that is going to be your best ally in enacting change in your organization.
Absolutely. All right. I think one other question I had for you was, how do I figure out the WITHM part, which is also, by the way, my new favorite acronym. But how do I figure out the what's in it for me for someone else?
Sure. So one of the things you can do is, understand what is that person's role. We go back a little bit to where we were talking about the Phoenix is, if that person's role is in procurement, their role is to say yes or no, we have the money or the funding to spend on this tool, then you probably understand that what's in it for me is that, number one, we're going to have efficiency. So we'll be able to release our products more often, which is going to allow us to get more, products to market faster, so our customers will be more happy and they'll give us more money, therefore offsetting the cost of the tool. Or we are going to reduce our defect spend or our defect amounts by 10%, which is going to save us $1 million, which again is going to offset the cost of the tool. Or are they a people person who is really concerned about the process efficiency? At that aspect, you could potentially approach it from a cycle time standpoint, which, from a DevOps area is, understanding cycle times in your entire process is probably one of the key concepts of DevOps. So, here understanding, how much time is a person spending on a certain process, whether it's manual testing, actually releasing the code, automation, whatever it might be, but kind of framing it to I am going to reduce this process by X%, which is going to allow us to release this much faster. So it's really just trying to understand them and kind of, get to know what their role is. And sometimes it's just sitting down and having a conversation with them is, if it's someone you've got a good rapport with or someone that you've got any idea, sitting down and saying, hey, I have this idea where I'm thinking about doing some change, but I'm curious to see, what do you do from a day-to-day basis, or what keeps you up at night? That's a favorite question I love to ask all of my stakeholders is, what keeps you up at night? And when you frame it that way, it allows them to say, well, I'm concerned with the number of customer service tickets we have or the number of defects we might have. So it just allows you to help them put in their own frame of mind how to clearly explain to you what their biggest pain points are.
I love that question, the what keeps you up at night. I ask the same thing to people. So I think we just have time for another question or two. So if anyone else wants to ask a question, feel free, and I'll see if we can get it in. But here's one. So we're following a very manual process, doing things that aren't particularly useful, and there's some obvious changes that everyone really wants to make, but it's a very large organization. So it's all fine and good when you can talk to one person, figure out they're with them, and make a pitch around them. And we already had a commenter about a larger company, but do you have any advice for since you're at a pretty large company, any advice for affecting change in a broader scope?
Yeah, and this goes back to something I was mentioning before is if you're having big process problems, make sure you can clearly articulate and document your cycle times. And essentially cycle time, as I mentioned before, it's how long it takes to do a certain process. It could be how long it takes a developer to respond to a bug ticket. It could be how long does it take to actually do the physical build of all of the code and the automation, whatever it might be. But be able to clearly articulate, this is what our cycle time is right now from, A to Z. If we were to make this change by removing this process or automating this or, virtualizing this, whatever it might be, we will be able to save X amount of time. And then pilot that. If you've got a team who is on board, pilot that through that team to actually show some of your hard evidence. That to me has been one of the biggest things in a large organization. It kind of goes back to the old Tom Cruise movie, show me the money. That oftentimes is the response I get, or the response I get from leaders in large organizations is show me the proof. You've got this idea, but I'm responsible for, over 1,000 testers here. I need to see proof that this is actually going to work and it's going to be positive. So that's really where things like pilots, betas, being able to run them in smaller teams is really going to benefit you and really is very critical for large organizations.
Yeah, that's fantastic. I love the show me the money. I think that's pretty universal as you move towards all the leadership at your organization. So I think we have time for one very quick question, if you can give a quick answer here. How do we handle a situation when a developer team is present at a different location, the automation team is in yet another location? Or how would you handle that?
Oh, yes. So making sure that communication is extremely clear. One of the things that we do like to see is for some of those teams, especially for like a sprint planning or backlog refinement session, is to try to use video conferencing with as much as possible. So so much of delivering a pitch, explaining an idea is nonverbal communication. It shows you the passion when someone is actually standing up and having a conversation or having that conversation. So if you have teams that are in many different locations, try to find a way to use some sort of video software to where you can actually look at that person face to face and have that conversation. Other than that, it's just ensuring that you are really tightened up on your clarifications, understanding that when someone says something that you truly understand what they mean, because you may not have the opportunity to have as much of a conversation with them. So that was my really quick answer to a really complex problem. So if you want to know more, reach out to me and I'm happy to help you on that.
Yeah, that's definitely a complex question. All right, well, that completes our Q&A section. So I think we're basically done.
Yeah, basically, yeah. Well, that was those are some really interesting questions. They covered a lot of topics there, so I know the audience got a lot out of it. I do want to remind the audience that today's event has been recorded, so if you missed any or all of it, or if you just want to listen to it again, you will have the opportunity to do so. We will be sending out an email after the webinar sometime this afternoon that includes a link that will take you right to the webinar on demand. The webinar will also be located on the DevOps.com website. So you can always go there to find the webinar. It will be listed under webinars on demand. And while you're there, check out some of the other webinars that we have both upcoming and on demand. Elise, Carmichael, and Adam Satterfield, both of you. Thank you so much for giving us such a great presentation and joining me today. I really appreciate it. Also want to thank
you for the opportunity.
Great. I also want to thank the audience for joining me today. This is Charlene O'Hanlon, and I'm signing off. Have a great day, everybody.